Black man gave up his first-class seat for pregnant woman, then she did this. What would you do if faced with a choice between your comfort and helping a stranger in need? For Marcus, a determined young professional, his decision on one ordinary flight would ripple into an extraordinary journey, changing not only his life but also the destiny of an entire family. Marcus, a man who had worked tirelessly to achieve his dreams, found himself in a moment that tested his values. On a flight to an important business meeting, he was faced with a decision, one that seemed small at the time but would lead to life-changing consequences for himself and others. This story isn't just about a simple act of generosity, it's a powerful reminder of how one small, selfless choice can spark a chain reaction of unexpected events. As we follow Marcus's journey, we'll uncover the incredible impact of his decision and how kindness can create ripples that touch lives in ways we can't imagine. Growing up in a small, struggling neighborhood, Marcus faced challenges that many couldn't fully understand. As a teenager, he was often labeled as trouble. Teachers and authority figures were quick to assume the worst, judging him based on appearances rather than his potential. These unfair stereotypes created hurdles that seemed impossible to overcome. But Marcus had one constant source of strength: his mother. She refused to let him believe the labels others placed on him. Her unwavering belief in his abilities became the foundation of his resilience. She encouraged him to push beyond expectations, to work harder, and to dream bigger. Her words stayed with him during his darkest moments, driving him to focus on his education and future. Years of determination paid off. Marcus built a successful career as a data analyst, working tirelessly to achieve his goals. This particular flight marked a milestone in his journey. He had earned a first-class ticket, a symbol of how far he'd come. Yet, even in first class, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. Spaces like these weren't always diverse, and he was often aware of the curious glances directed his way. Despite the stares, he reminded himself that he deserved to be there as much as anyone else. This was a seat he had worked hard for, a reward for countless hours of effort and persistence. Settling into his seat, Marcus felt both a sense of accomplishment and a lingering unease. He wasn't there for luxury, he was simply traveling for an important work opportunity. Still, moments like these reminded him of the journey it took to get here, the sacrifices, the support of his mother, and the determination that carried him through. Marcus's story was about more than personal success, it was about breaking barriers and proving that no label or bias could define him. And soon, he would show that true character isn't just about where you've been but about the choices you make when life presents the unexpected. As Marcus settled into his first-class seat, flipping through the worn pages of his favorite novel, the usual hum of the airplane engines was interrupted by soft murmuring nearby. He glanced up to see a visibly exhausted woman standing unsteadily in the aisle. One hand clutched the overhead bin for balance while the other rested protectively on her rounded belly. She was clearly pregnant and looked as though the weight of the day and perhaps life itself was bearing down on her. Beside her stood a man, likely her husband, his face etched with worry. James, as Marcus would later learn, was trying his best to offer support, but his own nervous energy was palpable. The two of them scanned the rows of plush first-class seats, their assigned places clearly elsewhere in the plane. It didn't take much to see the problem. Emily looked too tired and uncomfortable to endure the cramped seating in the back of the plane. Watching the couple, Marcus felt a pang of empathy. He thought about how challenging it must be for Emily to manage a long flight in her condition. His eyes fell on the empty seat beside him, one he had paid extra for to ensure his own comfort on this trip. He'd worked hard for the opportunity. Yet at that moment, it was clear someone else needed it more. Without hesitation, Marcus rose and gently tapped Emily's shoulder. "Ma'am," he said with a kind smile. "Please. Take my seat. You'll be much more comfortable here." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. And for a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. "Oh. I couldn't," she began. But her voice betrayed how much she wanted to accept. Marcus shook his head reassuringly. "It's no trouble at all. Please." After a moment of hesitation, Emily nodded gratefully, her exhaustion giving way to relief. James, equally stunned by the gesture, quickly mouthed, "Thank you," as he helped Emily settle into the seat. As Marcus gathered his belongings and began walking toward the back of the plane, he could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him. Some looked curious, others impressed, and a few exchanged quiet whispers. It wasn't every day someone gave up their first-class seat so selflessly. Even the flight attendant, who had witnessed the interaction, gave Marcus a small, approving smile as she helped Emily get comfortable. It was a quiet moment of humanity that stood out in a space often marked by personal priorities over collective goodwill. Marcus, meanwhile, didn't seek acknowledgement or thanks. He simply wove his way through the narrow aisle, searching for an open seat in the crowded economy section. Back in coach, Marcus found himself squeezed between two passengers who barely looked up as he adjusted his backpack beneath the seat. It wasn't the ideal situation, but Marcus didn't complain. He stared out the window, reminding himself it was only a few hours, and thought about how relieved Emily had looked as she sat down. Later, as the plane landed and passengers began filing out, Marcus waited his turn at the back. In the bustling airport terminal, he stopped at a coffee shop to wake himself up before his meeting. As he rummaged for his wallet, a familiar face appeared. James. "Hey," James said, extending a hand. "I just wanted to thank you again for what you did. My wife's name is Emily. And I'm James. You really helped her out today." Marcus shook his hand with a polite smile. "It's no problem. Really. I'm glad she was able to rest." James, eager to express his gratitude further, insisted on buying Marcus a coffee. Despite feeling awkward, Marcus eventually accepted. As they exchanged casual conversation, James shared that Emily had experienced complications during her pregnancy, making this trip especially difficult for her. Before parting ways, James asked for Marcus's contact information, though Marcus wasn't sure if he'd ever hear from them again. He left the encounter with a sense of quiet satisfaction. A simple act of kindness had made a big difference for a family in need. And while he expected nothing in return, life had a way of surprising those who acted selflessly. The next morning, as Marcus waited in line for coffee before heading to his meeting, a familiar voice broke through the buzz of the crowded cafe. "Marcus." "Hey." He turned to see James approaching, his expression a mix of gratitude and relief. "Thanks again for what you did yesterday. Emily was able to get some much-needed rest during the flight." Marcus smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. How's she feeling now?" James nodded. "Better. Thankfully. Listen. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I wanted to share something." They grabbed their coffees and found a quiet corner to sit. James explained that he and Emily had traveled to the city under difficult circumstances. Emily's father had recently passed away, and while grieving, they had uncovered some troubling issues with his estate. Her dad owned a business, James said, his voice tinged with frustration. It turns out there are financial records that don't add up: missing funds, suspicious transactions. We're not sure what's going on, but we need help figuring it out. James hesitated, then leaned in slightly. I don't know if this is asking too much, but Emily mentioned you seemed like someone who'd know what to do. You're a data analyst, right? Marcus nodded slowly, surprised by the request. I am. I work with numbers, patterns, and data all the time. But this sounds complicated. Have you spoken to an attorney? James sighed. We have. But they don't specialize in this kind of thing. We could really use someone with your skills to take a closer look. Just as Marcus was about to respond, Emily joined them. She still looked tired but managed a warm smile. Hi, Marcus, she said softly. I just wanted to thank you again. Yesterday was a lot. And I don't know how I would have made it through without your kindness. Marcus shook his head. It was nothing. Really. I'm just glad you're feeling better. Emily glanced at James, then back at Marcus. James mentioned he talked to you about my dad's situation. I know you're busy, and this isn't your responsibility. But we're desperate. I don't know who else to turn to. The sincerity in her voice gave Marcus pause. He thought about his upcoming work obligations, the big meeting he'd prepared for over weeks. His schedule was packed, and taking on anything else seemed impossible. Yet, he couldn't ignore the weight of their plea. I'll be honest, Marcus said after a moment. I don't usually take on side projects, especially not something this personal. But if I can spare a little time to look over the numbers, I'll see what I can do. Relief washed over Emily's face. Thank you, she said, her voice almost breaking. James quickly added, we don't expect you to do this for free. We can compensate you, though it might not be what you're used to. Marcus raised a hand. Let's not worry about that right now. Send me the records, and I'll take a look when I have time. As they exchanged contact information, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something much bigger than a casual favor. The couple's gratitude was clear, but so was their desperation. Walking out of the cafe, Marcus wrestled with his decision. Was this the right move? Balancing his professional responsibilities with a personal request was going to be tricky. But something about Emily and James's situation felt too important to ignore. In the back of his mind, his mother's voice echoed, help when you can, and the rest will fall into place. Marcus didn't know where this path would lead, but for now, he was willing to take the first step. A few days after agreeing to help, Marcus sat in his hotel room with a stack of financial records spread across the desk. Emily and James had shared every document they could find related to her late father's business. On the surface, the numbers seemed ordinary. But as Marcus delved deeper, patterns began to emerge, patterns that didn't add up. Certain transactions were flagged with vague descriptions, and large sums of money seemed to have disappeared without explanation. A few payments were routed through obscure accounts, raising even more red flags. Among the files, Marcus found a handwritten note in the margin of one ledger, discuss insurance with Clyde. Marcus frowned. The name Clyde Harris appeared several times in the records, often tied to discrepancies. A gut feeling told him Clyde might be involved in something shady. But he needed more evidence before jumping to conclusions. Over the next few nights, Marcus pored over the data, cross-referencing account numbers and transaction dates. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. It appeared Emily's father had been pressured into deals that siphoned money out of the business. likely without his full understanding. When he tried to pull out, the threats began. As Marcus worked, Emily and James started receiving troubling messages. Late one night, James called Marcus, his voice shaky. "We got a note," he said, his words laced with fear. "It was left on our doorstep. It says, 'Stop asking questions, or you'll regret it.'" Marcus's stomach tightened. The message confirmed his suspicion someone wanted to bury the truth. "Was it signed?" he asked. "No," James replied. "But it doesn't take a genius to figure out who's behind it. Clyde Harris's name keeps coming up in Dad's files. And now this?" Emily, who had been listening in the background, added, "I don't want to stop looking. But I'm scared. What if this gets worse?" Marcus understood their fear. But he also knew they couldn't back down. "We're onto something," he said firmly. "That's why they're trying to intimidate you. But threats like this only prove we're getting closer to the truth." Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Marcus convinced James and Emily to involve the police. The next morning, they met with a detective, handing over the threatening note and a summary of Marcus's findings so far. Detective Harris, a sharp-eyed investigator, listened carefully as Marcus explained the anomalies in the financial records. "It's not concrete evidence," Marcus admitted. "But it's enough to warrant a closer look at Clyde Harris and his dealings with Emily's father." The detective nodded. "We'll open a case and look into Clyde. But these things take time. In the meantime, I'd advise you all to be cautious. Don't engage with anyone suspicious. And document everything." While the police began their own investigation, Marcus and James decided to continue digging. They returned to the files, looking for connections between Clyde and the missing money. Marcus also started searching public business records and registries for information on Clyde's operations. One night, Marcus uncovered a crucial piece of evidence: a series of emails between Emily's father and an unnamed recipient, discussing urgent insurance matters. The tone suggested her father had been reluctant to comply with the recipient's demands. The emails hinted at a deeper issue, possibly blackmail. As they pieced together more details, the threats escalated. Another note appeared, this time explicitly warning them to stop investigating Clyde. Emily was visibly shaken, and James's frustration boiled over. "We can't keep living like this," he exclaimed. "We need to expose this guy before he does something worse." Marcus agreed but urged caution. "We're making progress," he said. "But we can't rush this. We need solid evidence if we want to bring Clyde down for good." The tension weighed heavily on all of them. Emily struggled to stay calm, especially with her due date fast approaching. Marcus worked late into the night, determined to find the smoking gun that would bring justice for Emily's family. Days later, the police obtained a search warrant for one of Clyde's warehouses, thanks to the evidence Marcus had compiled. Inside, they uncovered falsified shipping records, smuggled goods, and a trail of financial documents implicating Clyde in a series of fraudulent schemes. The breakthrough gave Emily and James a glimmer of hope. The police confirmed that Clyde was being investigated for blackmail and other crimes. However, the danger wasn't over. Clyde's associates were still at large, and his influence lingered. Despite the risks, Marcus remained committed to helping Emily and James see this through. "We're closer than ever," he told them during a late-night meeting. "Clyde's empire is starting to crack. We just need to stay the course." Emily nodded, her determination outweighing her fear. "For my dad," she said quietly. And for our baby. As the investigation deepened, Marcus realized how far his decision to give up a first-class seat had taken him. What began as a small act of kindness had thrust him into a battle for justice, testing his courage and resolve. Yet, he wouldn't trade the experience. It had shown him the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of danger. The breakthrough came early one morning when the police executed a search warrant on Clyde Harris's warehouse. Inside, they uncovered a treasure trove of evidence: falsified shipping records, smuggled goods, and a series of encrypted emails that revealed Clyde's involvement in blackmail and fraudulent activities. Among the documents was a direct link to Emily's father, proof that Clyde had coerced him into unethical deals under threat of exposing personal or financial secrets. The police moved quickly, arresting Clyde and 2 of his associates. News of the operation spread, and Marcus, along with Emily and James, received confirmation that Clyde would be charged with multiple crimes, including blackmail and financial fraud. Though relieved, Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. "My dad got caught up in something he didn't know how to handle," she said, her voice trembling. "At least now, the truth is out, and his name can be cleared." With Clyde behind bars, Emily and James could finally breathe. The looming threat was gone, and the fear that had overshadowed their lives began to lift. For Emily, the victory wasn't just about justice, it was about protecting her family's future. As they sorted through the remaining financial records, Emily and James worked with their lawyer to restore her father's estate. They wanted to ensure that any lingering debts or anomalies tied to Clyde's schemes were resolved. In the meantime, Emily focused on her health and preparing for the arrival of their baby. "I can't imagine how we would have gotten through this without you, Marcus," Emily said during a quiet moment. Her gratitude was evident, her voice filled with emotion. James nodded in agreement. "You didn't just help us with the numbers, you gave us hope when we needed it most." Marcus was humbled by their words. Reflecting on the events that had unfolded, he realized how much his initial act of kindness had spiraled into something far greater than he could have anticipated. Offering up his first-class seat had seemed like such a small gesture, but it had opened a door to uncovering the truth, dismantling a dangerous scheme, and bringing peace to a family in turmoil. Sitting in the quiet of his hotel room one evening, Marcus thought about his mother's teachings, how she always emphasized helping others without expecting anything in return. This experience had brought those lessons to life in ways he'd never imagined. He also thought about how much he had grown through this process. The late nights spent poring over data, the tense moments of uncertainty, and the shared relief of victory had all shaped him. Marcus realized that while his expertise in analytics had helped uncover the truth, it was his willingness to get involved, to care, that had made the difference. Before leaving the city, Marcus visited Emily and James one last time. Their home, once filled with tension and fear, now felt calm and inviting. They shared a meal together, laughing and reminiscing about the journey that had brought them to this moment. As he prepared to leave, Emily handed Marcus a small envelope. "Just a little thank you," she said with a smile. Inside was a handwritten note expressing their gratitude, along with a picture of the 3 of them and their newborn baby. Marcus held the note and photo, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "It was a team effort, yours, mine, and even your dad's. He made mistakes, but he also left behind a family strong enough to face them." As Marcus boarded his flight home, he thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. One small act of kindness, a seat offered to a pregnant woman, had sparked a ripple effect that touched lives in profound ways. The lesson was clear: the simplest gestures can lead to the greatest changes. And while Marcus hadn't set out to be a hero, his actions had reminded everyone involved of the power of compassion, perseverance, and justice. For Marcus, the experience wasn't just a story of uncovering wrongdoing or bringing a criminal to justice, it was a testament to the fact that sometimes the smallest acts can make the biggest difference. As Marcus sat in his quiet apartment weeks after returning home, he couldn't help but replay the events of the past month. What started as a simple gesture, giving up his first-class seat to Emily, had spiraled into a life-changing journey. He'd gone from being a casual bystander to a trusted ally, uncovering truths, battling fears, and helping a family find peace. Through it all, Marcus realized something profound: kindness is never just a moment. It's a seed that, once planted, can grow into something far greater than you ever imagined. His single act of generosity had created a ripple effect, bringing justice to Emily's father, ensuring a safe environment for their baby, and fostering a bond with people he once considered strangers. The experience also reminded Marcus of the lessons his mother had taught him, that helping others, no matter how small the act, is never wasted. It reinforced his belief in the value of stepping outside his comfort zone, even when the road ahead was uncertain. Beyond the outcome, Marcus cherished the connection he had formed with Emily and James. Their gratitude and friendship had left an indelible mark on his heart. They continued to stay in touch, exchanging updates and sharing milestones. For Marcus, their enduring friendship was a reminder of how meaningful relationships can emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. Marcus reflected on the impact of their journey: a family restored, a criminal brought to justice, and a baby born into a world free from the shadow of fear. These outcomes weren't just about the events themselves, they were about what happens when people choose to care. He realized that small decisions, whether to help or to look away, could shape the trajectory of someone's life. Kindness, he thought, wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic acts. It was about noticing when someone needed help and being willing to step in, even if it required sacrifice. As Marcus thought about his journey, he wanted others to see the value in what he had learned. He hoped people would embrace the idea that even the smallest act of kindness could have a profound impact on someone's life. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't about being extraordinary, it was about being human. It was about recognizing that kindness has no boundaries and that it doesn't take much to make a difference. To anyone listening, Marcus would say this: you never know how far a small gesture can go. You never know whose life you might touch or what challenges you might help overcome. Kindness has a way of coming full circle. And sometimes, it leads you to places you never expected to be. As Marcus closed the battered novel he had carried with him throughout the journey, he smiled, knowing that his own story was proof of the power of compassion. The ripple of one small act had created waves of change, and that lesson would stay with him forever.